So today we're going to be looking from our good old friend HistoryMarche about the Battle of Edessa, and this is essentially where I believe Emperor Valerian, if I hope I'm remembering that name correctly, but essentially where Shapur captures him, and the birth of the Sassanid Empire, and etc. etc. So yeah, it'll be cool to see this. We haven't really covered this topic since like Dovahadi. Years ago, but I do remember that. So yeah, let's get to it.
For the Roman Empire in the 3rd century AD, the countdown to military crisis began with the rise of the Sasanians of Persia. The founder of the Sasanians was Ardashir, who, as the commandant of Dorobgerd, defeated various rivals in central Porsis, a state within the Parthian Empire. Already an ambitious warlord, in 211 or 212 he declared himself the king of Istah, following the death of the previous king, his brother Shapur, and crushed a rebellion in Dorobgerd. Subsequently, the Parthian Empire had grown increasingly unstable, and in 213 a civil war broke out between the brothers Vologas VI and Artaban IV. Ardashir exploited the crisis to expand his kingdom, conquering Kerman, the coastline of Porsis, and the region later known as Ardashir Kore. Artaban declared him an outlaw, but Ardashir responded by conquering Isfahan and Arjan, thereby securing control over the remaining 2 districts of Porsis. He captured strong points from Nirafar, the king of Avaz, and he defeated and killed Bandu, the king of Masin. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, Artaban led his armies against Ardashir, but he was defeated in 2 battles. In the 3rd and final battle, fought at Harmazgan in 224, Artaban was slain in the fighting. In this final clash, Ardashir was accompanied by his son Shapur, who would become a great warrior in his own right, and was described by the Romans as being of enormous bodily size. Despite the death of Artaban, many of the satraps of Iran still refused to submit to Ardashir, either seeking to carve out their own kingdoms or retaining loyalty to Vologas VI or the sons of Artaban. Ardashir defeated Madig, king of Media, Vologas in Upper Mesopotamia, and he conquered Zobdekana, Arzanin, and the kingdom of Albania. He seized Ctesiphon, killing Artavas's son Ersas, and had put an end to Arab raids, before proceeding to launch a grand campaign in the east. He subjugated Parthia itself, the satrapies of Gurgan, Abrahar, and Margiana, and the Indo-Parthian kingdom of Sakistan, and he received the submission of the Indo-Parthian kings of Turan and Makran.
Alright, so this is cool. I always do like when HistoryMarche brings back, he always brings a history lesson right before the battle, which I always do appreciate from him. And, the Persian Empire is kind of unique because, it's unique because, when we think of, like, the Persian Empire, usually we'll think of, like, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, like, that was founded by Cyrus the Great. And then we have the Sassanid, Sasanian Empire, which is also called the Persian Empire. So it's like the Persian Empire had like 2 lives, I don't know. There's something kind of unique with that. I'm sure there's a lot of distinction and differences, obviously, but it's just kind of cool that they're both called the Persian Empire. It's almost like it had 2 lives, I don't know. I think that's probably the most unique aspect of, like, the banner of the Persian Empire, right?
Ardashir then defeated the Khwarezmians, forcing them to pay tribute, and he marched on Bakhria at the time of the Kushan Empire. His campaign caused the Kushan Empire to split in 2, with the Kushans of Bakhria becoming Sasanian vassals. Meanwhile, the weakened Parthian Arsacid dynasty continued to control the kingdom of Armenia, and thus Ardashir's attention turned to the west.
I'll say though, probably the Romans were happy when their rival, the Parthians, were disintegrated, right? They were probably like, yes. And then kind of they had the worst luck because then the Sasanian Empire just became their new rival for a long time. So yeah, that probably wasn't the best luck. I'll say we did cover the Parthian Empire from Kings and Generals, which started in its really nomadic roots and became such a great rival to even the Romans. So I have to say, like, I'm actually getting a lot interested in a lot of more, I guess, underrated empires. Like, I'm kind of looking a bit more into the Parthians and even, like, the Seleucids. I kind of have, like, a fascination with the Seleucids at the moment. So, yeah, I don't know. I just find it all interesting.
He attempted to conquer Armenia, as well as the independent kingdom of Hatra. However, both efforts were unsuccessful, in particular the campaign into Armenia, where Rome sent volunteers to aid the Parthians.
Oh wow.
These were the early signs of tension between Ardashir and the Romans, who were weary of the new empire being forged to their east. However, Ardashir also planned to conquer the Roman territories of Upper Mesopotamia, as until the 2nd century, many of these lands were Parthian. War was to come. There is a growing consensus that modern life. In 231, Ardashir captured Roman fortresses on the Tigris and Euphrates and raided as far as Syria and Cappadocia. The Romans responded with panic. Their army in Mesopotamia killed its own commander, Heraclio, and mutinies and rebellions followed. In 232, Severus Alexander responded with a massive three-pronged offensive against the Persians. Alexander was to lead the main army to relieve the besieged fortress of Nisibis, while the northern army would invade Media via Armenia, and a southern army would advance down the Euphrates. However, although he relieved the siege of Nisibis, Alexander failed to advance quickly enough in support of the other armies. Ardashir detached a force to distract the northern army while he himself annihilated the southern army in Messene.
We love to see divide and conquer, right? Because that's essentially what Ardashir's doing, and the Romans kind of gave him that opportunity.
The northern army, after being ordered to return west, suffered a costly winter march through the mountains of Armenia. The Persians had also sustained significant casualties, and so the war ended for the time being. But impressively, the Sasanian Empire had defended itself against a three-pronged invasion while still in its infancy.
It's true. And while the Romans definitely had issues, they definitely, like I said, around this time, the Romans were having quite a bit of issues. But that's still not to take away from Ardashir's accomplishments there, because that still is defeating Rome, while it's still, like, pretty strong in the world stage, obviously, as a great superpower, even if it is weakened by internal strife and whatnot, you know?
Alexander returned west to deal with barbarian incursions, where in 235, he was slain by his own soldiers, disdainful of his conduct. Meanwhile, Ardashir, ever energetic, crushed a religious revolt in Ardashir-Kure and launched a major campaign into Arabia. He defeated a coalition of East Arabian kings, with the king of Oman slain in battle. Sanatruk, the king of Bahran, hurled himself from the walls of a besieged fortress, and Ardashir succeeded in vassalizing Yamameh, Bahran, and Oman.
Dang.
Ardashir then reignited the war with Rome, now under the rule of Maximinus. He conquered much of Upper Mesopotamia, including Nisibis and Kare, and in 238 or 239, his forces began a new siege of Hatra. Situated atop a precipitous ridge and surrounded by desert and loyal tribes who regarded it as a cultic center, the city had resisted sieges by Trajan and Septimius Severus. But in 240, Ardashir raised his son Shapur to the position of co-regent, who took command of the siege. It was under Shapur's command that the most extensive siege works known to the Near East were undertaken. In the wake of the massive siege, Shapur sacked the city. Overnight, the famed city of Hatra withered into a ghost town, with the surrounding tribes driven out or exterminated. However, in 240...
That's cool to see the rise of an early, like, Shapur. And I have to say, Ardashir is really cool too. Like I said, we didn't really give him much attention. Obviously, in the Dovahari series, you know, it was a joke series in a sense. Focused on Rome and whatnot. But it's kind of cool to just kind of see just the rise of the Sasanian Empire. This is probably the most in-depth look of their rise we've seen so far on this channel, and Ardashir just blitzing everyone. The dude is going around just amazing, obviously. Ardashir, a very underrated guy. But again, you see, he's cut of the same cloth as many other great founders of empires who were just energetic, going back and forth and just rising.
The one Ardashir died, prompting a series of rebellions against the still young Sasanian regime. A coalition of Gilans, Daylamites, and Gerganians received Khwarezmian assistance. But Shapur defeated the coalition in battle and proceeded to subjugate the rebellious provinces, including the mountain abodes of the warlike Daylamites. Unfortunately for him, Roman Emperor Gordian III simultaneously launched a major counteroffensive. His experienced Praetorian prefect, Timasitheus, began retaking Roman territories in Mesopotamia. In 242, Shapur rushed back to his western front. Caught on the back foot with an exhausted army, he was defeated at Resina. The Romans reconquered their territory as far as Singara. But fortunes changed yet again when Timasitheus died of dysentery. Reorganizing his forces, in 244, Gordian pressed ahead towards Ctesiphon, only to be defeated by Shapur in a pitched battle near Mysicae. The details of Gordian's fate are debated, but most likely he was mortally wounded in battle. With their emperor dead, the Roman army found itself trapped in foreign territory, and the new...
Yeah, let's not underestimate that. Shapur just killed a Roman emperor and defeated him in battle. Like, I think that's already enough to set your empire in the world stage, as it were, since Rome is kind of the main power of the world, at least here in the West, you know. So let's not ignore what he just accomplished, right?
Emperor Philippa had to negotiate with Shapur to secure the Roman army's escape. He paid a massive ransom of 500,000 gold coins, agreed to pay tribute to the Persians, and vowed not to intervene in Armenia. And for the time being, Shapur accepted the Roman reconquests as he shifted his focus east.
Absolutely.
In the late 240s, Shapur invaded the Kushan Empire, conquering the desert and mountain-filled lands of Arachosia, Sogdiana, and the Kabul Valley. Around the year 250, he marched back west. Relaunching the campaign into Armenia, he finally conquered the mountainous last kingdom of the Arsacids. In 251, Rome suffered a...
Yeah, considering how Armenia was kind of involved with the Parthian and Roman history, seeing that as how it kind of met its end in terms of its more autonomous state. Granted, it does come back, but you know what I mean. That's so interesting. And again, Shapur, man, like, again, this isn't like a completely weak Rome. I know it has its issues, obviously, but it's still like far from its past its heyday, you know? Like the Byzantines War, for example. So like I do find these achievements he has over the Romans still impressive in my opinion. And you know, even getting the Romans to straight up pay tribute, like, you know, yeah, that's just really cool, I think.
A major defeat to Cniva's Gothic coalition at the Battle of Abritus. Shapur, perhaps aware of this disaster, accused the Romans of assisting the Armenians and in 252 re-invaded the empire. But this time, rather than focus on the fortresses of Upper Mesopotamia, Shapur marched up the Euphrates and deep into Syria, outflanking Rome's key Mesopotamian defenses. He wiped out a large Roman army, supposedly 60,000 men strong, at the Battle of Barbalissos.
Dang.
He then bypassed further strong points to make a surprise march on Antioch, the largest city in Rome's eastern provinces. Assisted by the exile Marid-Ha, he caught Antioch's inhabitants off guard while many were watching a theatrical production outside the city. He captured the citadel with a giant battering ram and proceeded to raid Syria and Cappadocia. He sacked 37 towns and cities by the end of 253, including Hierapolis, Beroia, Apamea, Larissa, Seleucia, Alexandretta, Doliche, and Germanicaea, while a second force raided the Satala region.
Yeah, Shapur is known for his aggression in history and just like how much of a menace he was, especially towards the Romans. You just see this. He just straight up walked into Syria, took this, and he's just going ham. You know, I always think about this, but it must have really sucked just being a normal person, like earlier points of history. Like you're just living in a town, and then suddenly like there's a random enemy king army shows up and just decides to sack your city. like man, that sucks.
From Armenia. In the panic, Uranius Antoninus, a priest in Emesa, led a successful defense of his city, after which he led a brief usurpation against Emperor Gallus. In contrast, Odaenathus, the commander of Palmyra's military, is said to have sought Shapur's friendship. Shapur demanded that Odaenathus prostrate himself, something the latter would not do. Rome was not able to respond to their new, formidable enemy. For Shapur, these battles and raids were intended to damage Roman manpower, gather plunder and prisoners, sap Roman morale, and build royal prestige. However, he did not intend to hold territory in Syria and Anatolia. Rather, he deported much of the population of Antioch to his new city of Gunda Shapur, which was originally founded as Where Antioch Shapur, literally meaning Shapur's better Antioch.
Dude, I love that. Just like the amount of flexing, right? He's like... I remember that from when we watched I'm pretty sure it was the extra history video. And then it was like he just built a city just to flex on the Romans. Look, I'm better. Man, I kind of like seeing this because it's like in some aspects, you know, when you look back in history, it's like, you know, you expect things to be different. At least some things are, but like with human behavior, it's like in many ways we haven't changed. Like with some of the trash talking, it just like that's like something like a freaking 14-year-old would do. I don't know, but I like that. That was hilarious. Again, it's just funny to see like how in some areas us humans haven't changed, you know.
And became one of his capitals. But in terms of conquest, the main western target remained Upper Mesopotamia.
And I also remember, I think with the new Antioch, the better Antioch, he essentially like replicated the old Antioch in many ways. Like some people had like the exact same houses. I don't know. I think that was the extra history series. I could be wrong. It's been a while, but yeah. I don't know why, I just kind of find that amazing. Like, so petty, but such a power move.
And after disrupting Rome's eastern defences, Shapur captured the fortresses of Circesium, Dura Europus, and Apadana. Such was his dedication that he had his forces maintain a siege of Nisibis in the west, while he crushed a Kushan rebellion in the east. Although upon his return he succeeded in capturing Nisibis, the Romans recaptured Dura, and so in 256, Shapur again put the fortress to siege. As archaeology shows, the Persians and Romans built tunnels and counter-tunnels beneath the city walls, and Shapur used poisonous gas in the underground fighting. Shapur recaptured Dura, but this time it was abandoned by both sides. Despite Shapur's successes, the Roman network of fortifications proved difficult to overcome in the long term, as Roman garrisons could hide behind their walls and then combine forces with each other or with the Emperor Valerian to retake lost positions. In 259, Shapur again invaded northern Mesopotamia. He again captured Nisibis, but this time advanced as far as Carrhae, seizing the western stronghold with the aid of the giant battering ram. He then besieged nearby Edessa. This new offensive was answered by Valerian himself, who, after confronting Goths and Heruli in Anatolia, returned to the east with his main army.
Heck yeah. Yeah, so this is around the crisis of the 3rd century, where Valerian and his son Gallienus are basically trying to fix Rome together, and Valerian does get captured, and I like Emperor Gallienus a lot. Like, he is probably one of the Roman emperors who just never got a break in life. Like, he just kept fighting rebellions, kept fighting enemies, and at the end, really is underrated in his part of keeping Rome together before his assassination, you know? But at the same time, almost his assassination needed to happen just for people like Aurelian to rise, you know? Which is sad, because also I've heard that Aurelian had something to do, might have been just straight up involved in Gallienus' murder. So, Gallienus. But, yeah. Still feel bad for the guy, though. I think he's a very underrated Roman emperor.
In the spring of 260, Valerian's army arrived in the area between Edessa and Carrhae, and near to the army of Shapur, who was still besieging Edessa.
It's currently 1 a.m.
If I remember correctly, Valerian's army got hit by the plague that was going around at this time, so he lost a lot of numbers, I believe, due to that, and sickness, which didn't help him in fighting Shapur, who is someone you want to fight at your full strength, you know?
Shapur later wrote that Valerian had 70,000 men with him, drawn from the Rhine and Danube frontiers, as well as the eastern provinces. The strongest Roman arm was their infantry, and by the 3rd century, many were equipped with close combat spears to better deal with cavalry-heavy opponents.
Yeah, the Roman infantry was a main source of just their strength and power. It wasn't, I think, until, you know, Gallienus. Yeah, I think, like I said, a lot of early Roman history was mainly, a lot of their strength just came from their infantry game, and that's what they were renowned for, but I think it wasn't until, like, the crisis of the 3rd century they really stepped up their cavalry game, especially, like I said, with Emperor Gallienus kind of creating a huge cavalry corps so he could move faster and hit his enemies harder. I think that's where probably the biggest jump up in terms of the Roman cavalry game came. Definitely during the crisis, right? So, yeah.
For the same reason, Rome now also employed units of cataphracts, heavily armored horse archers, excellent Moorish light cavalry, as well as Germanic and Sarmatian mercenary horsemen.
Cataphractos! The cataphracts are cool. I actually was watching a video about some of their history. They're a pretty awesome, like, unit in terms of, like, the history of war.
The size of the Persian army is unknown, but the majority was made up of Sasanian cataphracts, including feudal Sasanian knights and prestige units, such as the Immortals and the Royal Guard, the Push-Taiban. By 260, these units must have been highly experienced under Shapur's command. The army also included high-quality horse archers, foot archers, and peasant light infantry, known as Payan, who were used to build and operate siege works. Shapur may have had a corps of elephants, which the Sasanians most often used as beasts of burden and as mobile archery platforms against enemy walls. In major battles, Sasanian kings could also employ the elephants as a rear guard. Shapur may have also used Dalamite mercenary infantry, whose martial qualities were praised by later Byzantine authors. Upon Valerian's arrival, Shapur repositioned much of his own army to deter a Roman attack on his position. The details of the coming engagement are shrouded in uncertainty, but Eastern Roman sources claim that Valerian's army had been hit by a plague, with the Moors most affected. As a result, the emperor was reluctant to offer battle. Shapur's numerous past victories were reason enough for caution.
Yeah.
Indeed, Valerian had arrived with a large amount of gold, hoping to strike a deal with his opponent. Valerian sent envoys to Shapur with proposals in hand, but Shapur refused to negotiate. Worse for the Romans, Shapur now realized that Valerian wasn't confident, and he learned of the plague. Shapur wanted battle.
Of course, he has, the conditions are very optimal, he just said right now. I mean, yeah, learning of the plague hitting your enemy, finding out now through this that Valerian ain't confident and doesn't want to give you a fight, is weakened. The conditions are optimal to give a battle, like, they're in your favor, you know? Like, why wouldn't you want to win a decisive victory against another Roman emperor?
His repositioned army presented an opportunity to the garrison, who launched a sally against their besiegers and forced part of the Payan infantry to retreat in disorder. This gave Valerian new hope. The specifics of what happened next are unclear, but Valerian, now more confident, appears to have marched his army through the plains between Edessa and Carrhae. These plains could favor the cavalry armies of the Persians, and indeed 3 centuries earlier, Crassus was famously defeated in this area in the Battle of Carrhae. Shapur's army subsequently broke camp. They likely left behind much of the Payan to maintain the siege while they prioritized their own speed, using riverbanks and ridges to conceal their approach. Peter the Patrician reports that Shapur followed close behind, waiting for the best moment to strike. That moment soon came, likely in part because the Romans were about to march through a particularly open stretch of land. Aurelius Victor reports that Valerian was surrounded by a trick, and Peter the Patrician claims that Shapur tricked Valerian with deceptions. Evidently, Shapur took the Romans by surprise, using part of his cavalry to intercept their line of march and cut off their retreat. Valerian now realized that he would have to fight a battle, and he drew up his forces. Like other Sasanian armies, Shapur will have placed his cavalry in several lines in the front, interspersed with archers, with other infantry deployed further back, and elephants possibly in the rear. As the Romans deployed for battle, Sasanian foot bowmen and horse archers advanced towards the enemy, firing volleys to soften the Roman formation. Persian horse archers harassed the Roman cavalry, attempting to bait them into breaking their lines. Shapur then gave the signal to charge to the first line of cataphracts. As these heavy horsemen thundered towards the Roman lines, they produced a thick cloud of dust, obscuring the vision of the Romans. The cataphracts smashed into the Roman infantry and cavalry, relying on their heavy armor to avoid taking serious casualties. Thrusting their heavy lances into the Roman legions, they disabled shields and tore through flesh. It soon became clear that Shapur planned to use his superior numbers of cavalry to encircle the Roman line. But rather than commit to a prolonged fight...
Yeah, I think the thing is just cavalry really is OP. And especially if utilized correctly, and considering just this, and, you know, considering just he has the more numerous cavalry, he has more speed and flexibility, like, you know, that idea of just completely surrounding the Romans, yeah, ain't such a bad one.
This first line of cataphracts disengaged and withdrew through gaps between the cataphract units of the second line. However, before the Romans could catch their breaths, the second Sasanian line struck.
Okay, we like to see this. He's not giving them a minute to breathe, is he? He's like, okay, first wave, next wave, just like wearing down the Romans. And again, he has the lines to keep this up compared to the Romans. Like, look, the Romans lack the numbers compared to, at least it looks like that according to this map, that the Romans seem outnumbered here.
Again, they stabbed their way through the mass of Romans with their lances. The Romans also inflicted casualties, especially the spearmen. However, in the open terrain, the cataphracts held the advantage.
Yeah. Cataphractos! But, yeah, like, again, with open fields like this, usually always favor cavalry, especially the heavier ones, right? we see that a lot, like, terrain like this is best suitable for them.
Again, avoiding a prolonged fight against massed infantry, the Sasanian heavy cavalry broke off the attack and rotated with other cataphracts, so that while cataphract units reorganized and recuperated...
Others just get... It's an endless assault. It's like ruthless aggression right here, right? Like, keep going, keep rotating. The Romans are just taking a pummeling, and they can't catch a break. They can't recuperate fully. It really is just like relying on that, and like obviously... And they're also relying heavily on their durability with their armor, right? And not tarrying too long to give the Romans an advantage, which is just smart. Like, you know what I mean?
The Romans experienced an unending series of charges, all with the momentum of an initial...
Look at this. Are they about to pull off the flanking maneuver?
...attack. Through frustration, many Romans likely broke formation in their desperate attempts to pursue the enemy. This left them vulnerable to Sasanian counterattacks.
Oh my goodness.
Moreover, Shapur had by now surrounded the enemy on all sides.
Oh my goodness.
Forcing them to bunch up.
Oh, completely has surrounded them. My goodness. And these guys pulled off the flank. The oldest trick in the book. But, this is bad. This is like, can I? You know, when the Romans just get completely surrounded on all fronts.
Panic took hold among the Romans, and many tried to flee. Breaking formation and with their backs to the enemy...
I want to say this about early Rome. It's like, earlier Rome, definitely, in terms of infantry, probably the best. I don't think anyone could fully match them. But often I found that the way to defeat the early Romans was really just by having better cavalry. Like, you think of Hannibal Barca, who a lot of his victories came down to just having superior cavalry. Like, the Numidian cavalry, you know, and whatnot. And it's just like, having better cavalry than the Romans could often negate even their infantry, if used correctly. That's something I always thought I noticed, you know? And Shapur just had way better cavalry. Granted, there are other aspects, such as numerical superiority, the plague, if it's true, hitting Valerian, There's a lot of factors more than just that, but you get what I mean.
Romans were cut down en masse by the Persian cavalry. The terrible slaughter lasted until dusk. In the chaos, Valerian himself was captured, either during the battle itself or amidst the chaos of the rout afterwards. The capture of an emperor was an unprecedented disaster for the Romans. Their eastern army was decimated. Maintaining momentum, Shapur launched the most far-reaching raid of his career.
Yeah, and there are a lot of legends about Valerian. Some say, I think the most persistent one is that he was kind of used as a footstool for Shapur to mount his horse or something. And there's a lot of accounts about how he was treated. Some say he died because he got flayed, his skin ripped off. Others, he got gold poured down his throat, like molten gold. And others say, no, he was treated completely respectfully by Shapur. He lived to be old and was respected. I heard multiple accounts about what happened to him, but he did die in captivity. And again, I think he might have been the first Roman emperor to just straight up be captured and just kind of kept as a prisoner,
Ravaging Syria, Cilicia, Cappadocia, Pamphylia, and Lycaonia. He sacked Antioch for a second time, as well as other major cities, including Seleucia, Tarsus, Tyana, Iconium, Caesarea, and Sebastea. All told, 36 cities were sacked. Some of the Roman commanders fought back, Ballista defeating smaller raiding forces in Cilicia, and Odaenathus harassing the rear of Shapur's army as it departed Roman territory. But the damage was done. Shapur deported Roman citizens en masse to populate his new cities of Gunda-Shapur and Bishapur. Prisoners of war were put to work on infrastructure projects. Emperor Valerian was humiliated by being put in charge of building a dam bridge at Shushtar, and he ultimately died in captivity. The capture of Valerian sent shockwaves through the empire. Valerian's son, Gallienus, now faced a collapse in loyalty to his dynasty. Usurpations broke out in Gaul, the Balkans, and the East. Worse for the Romans, Gallienus had to rely on Odaenathus to defend Syria and the eastern frontier, thus granting him much autonomy, which essentially turned Palmyra into a kingdom within the empire. Having won his greatest victory over the Romans, Shapur returned to his eastern frontier to finish off his other great enemy, the Kushans. He conquered Gandhara and captured the last king of the Kushans, Vasishka. However, Sasanian control in Upper Mesopotamia continued to be tenuous. Likely while Shapur campaigned on the subcontinent, Odaenathus retook Kare, Nisibis, and other fortresses. He even attempted to capture Ctesiphon, but a Sasanian army drawn from across the empire blocked Odaenathus's advance. By now, Shapur was an elderly man, campaigning less extensively and less often. In 271 he died, leaving behind a powerful empire that would endure for centuries.
Valerian's defeat at Edessa became the catalyst for a series of revolts that would lead to the temporary fragmentation of the Roman Empire. The chaos would subside with the arrival of Emperor Aurelian, and which we covered in detail. See the link to the video on the screen. Valerian's fate after his capture was a subject of debate. Roman soldiers were skilled craftsmen, so it's likely that Valerian and his troops were used on construction projects such as the building of the Caesar's Dam near Shushtar. Other sources claim that Shapur humiliated Valerian, using him as a human stepping stool while mounting his horse and keeping him in a cage to be humiliated for the Persian emperor's pleasure.
If you stayed around this far, You can also support us on Patreon or by clicking the thanks button.
Alright guys, we're gonna end the video right here. That was cool to see more in detail, and we'll come back tomorrow with something new.